Robert Sims spent 2 seasons proving he'd burn the world down to keep Silo 18 standing. So why, in Season 3 Episode 4, does he suddenly look like a man playing every side at once? Something shifted, and by the end of this episode, you'll understand exactly what he's been hiding. There's a version of Robert Sims that fans met back in Season 1, a man who enforced the rules without ever really living inside them. He wasn't cruel for the sake of cruelty. He was cruel because he believed, with total conviction, that cruelty was sometimes the price of survival. That belief cost people their lives. It cost Douglas Trumbull his. And for 2 seasons, that conviction made Sims almost impossible to root for, even when the show clearly wanted us to see the human being underneath the uniform. What made him interesting wasn't his loyalty. It was what happened when that loyalty stopped being rewarded. Sims did everything right by the Silo's twisted rulebook, and it still wasn't enough. He watched Bernard climb into the inner circle while he stayed locked outside it, passed over for the one position that would have validated every sacrifice he'd made. That kind of rejection doesn't just sting, it reorganizes a person's priorities. And for Sims, it meant turning toward the one relationship the Silo hadn't managed to corrode, his marriage to Camille. For a while, family quietly replaced ideology as the thing worth protecting. Then Season 2 blew that fragile piece apart. Bernard finally uncovered the safeguard, the secret that had been holding his entire worldview together, and it broke him. In the wreckage, he finally did what Sims had wanted all along. He named him Shadow. It should have been the moment Sims had been chasing for years. Instead, the algorithm looked past him entirely and chose Camille. Once again, Sims did everything asked of him and still ended up outside the room where decisions get made. That pattern matters, because Episode 4 is really about what a man does after he's been told, over and over, that his loyalty means nothing. Season 3 opens with Sims already knowing more than almost anyone about how the Silo actually works. But knowledge without power is just weight. What can he actually do with what he knows? That question sits underneath every scene he's in this episode, and it's part of why this installment plays as one of the strongest of the season. Quiet, tense, and finally giving common material worthy of the character's slow burn arc. The episode picks up seconds after the last one ended, with Camille walking out of the vault carrying the algorithm's verdict. Juliet Nichols has to die. It would be easy to assume Camille is performing loyalty here, playing a longer game the way she has before. But her call to Emerson, the security chief, reads as sincere. She wants Juliet sedated before she arrives, not tortured, not made to suffer. Whatever Camille believes about duty, she's not looking for cruelty. She's looking for an ending she can live with. Sims intercepts her on the way, and this is where the episode starts doing something genuinely clever with his character. He tells her he's figured out the algorithm's real plan. He doesn't argue. He doesn't try to talk her out of it. He offers to do it himself. On the surface, that reads as devotion, a husband trying to spare his wife the weight of pulling the trigger, so to speak. And the emotional logic tracks. Both of them understand what's actually driving this decision. If Juliet dies a hero, the population might accept it without needing to be dosed with the same memory-suppressing drug that erased an entire generation's understanding of the truth. Stopping that outcome is something Sims and Camille both want, for reasons that don't perfectly overlap but point in the same direction. But then medical happens, and the entire framing flips. Instead of sedating Juliet, the nurse plunges the syringe into Emerson's neck. Emerson very nearly kills her with her bare hands before the sedative finally takes hold, which tells you everything about how close this plan came to falling apart in real time. This wasn't a moment of hesitation from the nurse, it was premeditated. She'd already swapped out Juliet's memory suppression medication earlier, which is why Juliet had been quietly spitting the pills out instead of swallowing them. Someone built this escape in advance. Someone gave the nurse instructions. When she sacrifices herself to buy Juliet time, she sends her to level 76, to the pump room, and waiting there is Robert Sims. That single image reframes everything he said to Camille minutes earlier. He wasn't offering to help her end Juliet's life. He was buying time to save it. And once you sit with that, his earlier scene with Camille stops looking like a husband comforting his wife and starts looking like a man executing a plan several steps ahead of everyone in the room, including the person he's married to. This isn't out of nowhere, either. The season premiere already planted the seed. Sims lied to Camille, and to Juliet, about how Bernard actually died, claiming poison from the fire got into his suit. We saw the opposite. Sims wrapping plastic around a still-breathing Bernard's head. He didn't just cover up a death. He may have staged one. And if Bernard really does return before the episode ends, it confirms something unsettling. Sims isn't reacting to the chaos around him anymore. He's quietly architecting his own version of the future, one lie at a time, and nobody in Silo 18, not even his own wife, fully understands the game he's playing. While Sims was busy rewriting the rules of his own marriage, the story pulled its focus somewhere just as tense, just less obviously so, the Raider camp, where Lucas Kyle finally had to answer for the thing everyone's been dying to ask him: what actually happens during a cleaning? Patrick Kennedy wasn't buying his story. Not at first. Outside seemed survivable to him, breathable, almost normal, which meant Lucas insisting otherwise sounded less like truth and more like a man who'd been compromised somewhere along the way. It's a reasonable read, honestly. Kennedy's entire worldview depends on outside being safe, so a stranger showing up and calmly explaining that it isn't was never going to land easily. So Lucas did something smarter than argue. He explained the mechanics. The suit doesn't show a dying person a poisoned wasteland. It shows them a video, projected directly into the helmet, convincing enough that the person walks to their death believing they're finally seeing beauty instead of horror. It's one of the more quietly devastating details in the entire show, because it means every successful cleaning wasn't proof outside was survivable. It was proof the silo had engineered the perfect final lie. Kat Billings was the one who tipped the room. Her reasoning was almost embarrassingly simple. Why would Lucas lie about something like that? And she's right. There's no incentive for him to invent something this specific, this cruel, unless it's true. Sometimes the most convincing argument isn't a dramatic reveal. It's just someone asking the obvious question nobody else wanted to voice. What's interesting is what didn't get answered. Lucas spent an entire conversation surrounded by people who could have pressed him about what he was actually doing while hiding out in the mines, and somehow that thread just doesn't get pulled. He gets to keep that part of his story vague, which either means the show is saving it for later, or it means Lucas is better at controlling a narrative than his nervous energy lets on. Worth keeping an eye on. Eventually the group agrees on the only move that makes sense: go find Juliet and get the truth straight from her. Kennedy resists at first, pointing out that she's drugged and unreliable, but folds the moment Lucas mentions something specific. Juliet recognized him in the mines. That detail lands differently than anything else in the conversation, because it's not an argument, it's a fact Kennedy can't easily dismiss. And when the outsiders mention there's a way to reach her, but Kennedy won't like it, the episode plants a small, deliberate hook for later without wasting time explaining it. That's a good instinct. Not every mystery needs to be solved the moment it's raised. From there, the episode shifts into its other slow-burn mystery, and this one belongs entirely to Paul Billings. He starts the sequence just sitting outside a doctor's office, quiet, clearly still processing whatever he's learned about his wife's choices. It's a small, almost throwaway image, but it says more about where his head is than any line of dialogue could. Then he gets confirmation on Orla Kent's death, and the story reframes everything we thought we understood about it. She wasn't poisoned by rats. She wasn't even killed in the mines. Someone caved in the back of her skull, likely with rebar, and moved her body afterward specifically to make it look like an accident nobody would question. That's not a cover-up born of panic. That's someone thinking clearly under pressure, which narrows the list of people capable of pulling it off. Paul's first stop is Mike Davidson, Orla's boyfriend, a man who is either deeply strange by nature or strange because he's hiding something, and the show is careful not to tip its hand about which. He claims the last time he saw Orla, she'd just come back from a council meeting in a good mood and headed home alone, while he stayed behind to walk his dog. Convenient, except we already watched them leave together in the premiere. That's not a foggy memory. That's a lie, and Paul clocks it immediately, even if he doesn't say so out loud yet. Then Glenda Harwood enters the picture, and the investigation gets messier in the best way. She reveals Carla, Orla's shadow, has been missing from supply for months, meaning Glenda's effectively been running things solo without anyone noticing or caring enough to ask why. She brushes off the idea that she's jealous of Mike, almost too quickly, and casually mentions she used the free time to visit her father back on level 70. Her father happens to be Ed Harwood, the same man we watched give Orla a hard time all the way back in the premiere. Suddenly, Paul isn't looking at one suspect. He's looking at three people who all had motive, all had opportunity, and all have stories that don't quite hold together under pressure. Mike, Glenda, and Ed. The show doesn't rush to hand us an answer here, and that restraint is doing real work. It's forcing the audience to sit in the same uncertainty Paul is sitting in, weighing which lie is protecting a killer and which lie is just someone protecting themselves out of fear. What ties both of these threads together, Lucas fighting to be believed, Paul hunting for a truth someone worked hard to bury, is the same quiet theme running under Sim's and Camille's story. Everyone in Silo 18 is holding a piece of the truth. Almost nobody is holding the whole thing. And the closer these fragmented storylines creep toward each other, the more it feels like the walls between them are about to come down. Meanwhile, in the timeline running decades before any of this, Daniel and Helen were learning their own version of the same lesson, that knowing something and being able to do anything about it are two entirely different problems. Holed up at Helen's ex-boyfriend's place, the two of them were still trying to make sense of how thoroughly their contact had vanished. Steve was gone. The tape of Charlotte's mission was gone. Even Mr. Alameda, the man Daniel had spoken to at his own son's funeral, turned out to be reachable at a number that no longer existed. Every lead they pulled on just went dead in their hands, which is its own kind of message. Somebody with real resources had been cleaning up loose ends long before Daniel and Helen even knew there were loose ends to find. It's worth pausing on the chess game here, because it's a small detail doing a lot of quiet work. Helen noticed Steve's demeanor shift right after a specific move, and Daniel picked up on something sharper. The move itself made no strategic sense. Exposing his king like that wasn't a mistake from a man trying to win. It was a message from a man who knew he was being watched and couldn't say anything out loud. If that theory holds, it reframes Steve entirely. He wasn't just a source who went quiet. He was someone trying to warn them in the only language he had left available to him. That thread is what pushes Daniel toward Sam Ramsey, an old military friend now working out of the Pentagon. Their reunion carries a nice bit of levity. Sam would rather reminisce about their old cover band than relive whatever they went through overseas together, but the warmth doesn't last once Daniel explains why he's really there. The second Charlotte's mission comes up, Sam's whole posture changes. He's not cold about it. If anything, his sympathy feels genuine. He even says if it were his own sister, he'd be doing exactly what Daniel's doing. But sympathy and access are different things, and Sam makes it clear there are lines he isn't able to cross, no matter how much he wants to help his friend. That refusal is what puts Daniel and Helen back out in the open, which is exactly when the mystery man finally stops lurking in the background and decides to just talk to them. It's a smart choice by the story, honestly. He's been trailing them since the metro station, since Charlotte's clinic, since Helen's office the day she got fired, and rather than dragging that tension out for another few episodes, the show lets him walk right up and sit down. He doesn't confirm who he works for. He doesn't need to. What he offers instead is almost more unsettling than a name would be: reassurance. Steve isn't dead. He's not being tortured. He's been quietly rewarded with a prestigious position at a cybersecurity think tank. Mr. Alameda got a loan that saved his brother's business. Two men who could have exposed something inconvenient were paid off instead of silenced, which tells you this isn't an organization that solves problems with violence. It solves them with leverage. And then he turns that leverage on Daniel and Helen directly. For Helen, it's a dream job at a paper that would overlook her history of journalistic fraud, an offer built specifically to exploit the thing she wants most and can't otherwise have. For Daniel, it's something colder, an implied threat that Charlotte's ongoing care, memory wiped and fragile as it is, might become a lot harder to secure if he doesn't back off. That detail lands hard, because it strongly suggests Senator Thurman's fingerprints are somewhere on this arrangement, given her role in getting Charlotte into that clinic in the first place. The fallout between Daniel and Helen afterward isn't really about the mystery man at all. It's about two people confronting how thoroughly outmatched they are. Daniel lashes out, accusing Helen of wanting the job more than the truth, and there's an ugly kernel of honesty in that accusation even if it's unfair. Of course she wants it, she just lost everything. But Helen's response reframes the whole moment. The offer was never really about tempting her. It was about making refusal feel irrational. That's a more disturbing kind of power than money or threats. It's the kind that makes people talk themselves out of resistance. They part ways with nothing resolved, which somehow ends up being one of the more honest beats in the episode. Not every argument needs a tidy ending. Some just run out of things to say. By the time Sam reaches back out with new information, there's a genuine question of whether Daniel should even trust him. The same institutional language, loyalty, procedure, verification, keep surfacing in ways that feel less like reassurance and more like conditioning. Still, Daniel goes to Helen anyway, not because he's confident, but because he doesn't know how to keep going alone. And Helen, faced with the sheer absurdity of a minivan rented off a lamppost flyer, can't quite bring herself to turn him away. Back in Silo 18, Juliet's path toward Bernard was carrying its own quiet emotional weight. In between the danger, there were small cracks of memory returning, a flash of instinct that told her she'd want to hurt anyone who messed with her, a pull toward the digger void that turned into the name George, spoken almost involuntarily. Whatever Bernard can offer her when she finally reaches him, it's not just answers. It's a bridge back to a version of herself the silo tried to erase entirely. And that's really the through line connecting every corner of this episode, present and past. Whether it's Sims quietly working against the machine he used to serve, or Daniel and Helen realizing the people they're up against can simply buy silence instead of enforcing it, the show keeps circling the same idea. Power doesn't always look like control. Sometimes it just looks like making the truth too expensive for anyone to keep chasing. If this breakdown helped you catch something you missed, drop a like, and let me know in the comments which storyline you're most locked into right now. Subscribe if you want the next episode covered the same way, and I'll see you for the next one.